My parents committed identity theft and financial fraud against me for years, destroyed my credit before I was even an adult, then had the audacity to tell me I should be grateful for their generosity. I scorched the earth, pressed charges, got them legally banned from ever using my identity again, and delivered a courtroom speech that left everyone in tears. They thought I'd never fight back. They were very, very wrong. I never thought I'd be writing this story, but after 2 years of legal battles and finally reaching a place of peace, I need to get this out there. Maybe it'll help someone else who's going through something similar. Maybe it'll just be cathartic for me. Either way, buckle up because this is a long one. Let me paint you a picture of my childhood. From the outside, we looked like a perfectly normal middle-class family. Dad worked in sales, Mom was a part-time administrative assistant, and we lived in a decent house in suburban Ohio. But behind closed doors, my parents had a relationship with money that can only be described as toxic. They were the type of people who lived paycheck to paycheck despite making decent money, always chasing the next get-rich-quick scheme, always convinced that their big break was just around the corner. They'd blow their tax refund on a new TV instead of paying down debt, then complain for months about how tight money was. But here's the thing that really gets me, they were proud of their financial irresponsibility. They'd brag about gaming the system, about finding loopholes and workarounds. They saw anyone who was financially responsible as a sucker who didn't know how to work the system. I was an only child, and from a very young age, I was different from them. While they were impulsive spenders, I saved every penny of my allowance. While they bought lottery tickets and talked about hitting it big, I read library books about personal finance. By the time I was 14, I probably knew more about credit scores and compound interest than both of them combined. They used to mock me for it. "Look at our little accountant," they'd say when I'd ask why they were buying something we couldn't afford. "You worry too much about money. Money's meant to be spent." If only I'd known then what they were already doing behind my back. When I turned 16, my parents sat me down for what they called a grown-up conversation about building credit. Dad pulled out this whole presentation, he loved his PowerPoints, about how important it was to start building credit early. "Most kids your age don't even think about this stuff," Mom said, beaming like she was doing me the biggest favor in the world. "But we're going to set you up for success." They explained that they were going to help me get a credit card, just a small one, they said, and they'd manage it for me until I turned 18. They'd make all the payments, handle everything, and by the time I was an adult, I'd have a head start on building credit. At the time, it seemed almost reasonable. I mean, I was 16. I didn't need a credit card. And they were offering to handle all the responsibility while I got the benefits. What could go wrong? Everything. Everything could go wrong. But I didn't know that yet. I was just a teenager who trusted his parents, so I signed where they told me to sign and handed over my social security card when they asked for it. "This is going to be so great for your future," Dad said, filing away the paperwork. "You'll thank us when you're 25 and buying your first house with perfect credit." Narrator voice, _ he would not, in fact, be thanking them. _ For the next 2 years, I remained blissfully unaware of what was happening in my name. My parents never mentioned the credit card again, and I was too busy with school, work, and college prep to think about it. I had a part-time job at a local grocery store, and I was saving every penny for college. While my classmates were spending their paychecks on clothes and concerts, I was building what I thought was going to be a solid foundation for my future. I was accepted to Ohio State with a partial scholarship, but I still needed to cover about $15,000 a year in expenses. No problem, I thought. I had my savings, I'd work part-time during school, and I'd take out some student loans. Very manageable. My parents seemed weirdly nervous whenever I talked about college finances, but I figured they were just worried about me growing up and moving out. They kept making comments about how expensive college was, how maybe I should consider staying home and going to community college for a few years first. "You could live here rent-free," Mom would say. "Save so much money that way." But I was determined to have the full college experience. I'd worked hard, I'd earned it, and I was ready to start my adult life. If only I'd checked my credit report first. It was March of my senior year of high school. I was 17, about to turn 18, and I figured it was time to start learning about adult financial stuff. I'd been reading about credit reports and decided to check mine, just to see what it looked like. I went to annualcreditreport.com, put in my information, and waited for the page to load. What I saw made my blood run cold. There wasn't just one credit card on my report. There were _4_. And they weren't the small starter cards my parents had described. We're talking about cards with limits of $5,000, $8,000, and $12,000. And they were all maxed out. But that wasn't even the worst part. The worst part was that there were missed payments. Lots of them. My credit score wasn't the 750 plus I'd been imagining. It was 487. Not even 500. At 17 years old, before I'd ever made a single financial decision for myself, my credit was already destroyed. I sat in my bedroom staring at my laptop screen, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The dates showed that the first card had been opened when I was 14. The most recent when I was 16, which must have been the one they'd told me about. My hands were literally shaking as I scrolled through the report. Cash advances, over-limit fees, late payment penalties. My parents hadn't just taken out credit cards in my name, they'd used me as their personal ATM and then failed to even make the minimum payments. I printed out the report and went downstairs to confront them. I found my parents in the living room watching TV. Dad was in his recliner, Mom was on the couch with her laptop, probably playing Facebook games like she did every evening. "We need to talk," I said, holding up the credit report. The look that passed between them told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't going to be a conversation where they apologized and explained how they were going to fix this. This was going to be a fight. "Sit down, honey," Mom said in that voice she used when she was about to tell me something she thought I wasn't going to like. "Let us explain." "Explain what?" I demanded. "How you've been stealing my identity for 3 years. How you destroyed my credit before I'm even an adult. How you lied to me about building credit when you were actually ruining it." Dad muted the TV and turned to face me. "First of all, watch your tone. Second of all, we didn't steal anything. You're our son. We were helping you." "Helping me? My credit score is 487. "Credit scores can be fixed," Mom said dismissively. "The important thing is that we kept a roof over your head and food on the table. Do you have any idea how expensive it is to raise a child?" And there it was. The first indication of where this conversation was heading. "That's not my responsibility," I said. "I didn't choose to be born. You chose to have a kid. That means you chose to take on the financial responsibility of raising that kid." Dad's face was getting red, which was never a good sign. "You ungrateful little shit. We've given you everything. A home, food, clothes, opportunities. And this is how you thank us? Bye? Not wanting you to commit fraud in my name?" "It's not fraud," Mom snapped. "You signed the paperwork. You gave us permission. I was 16. And you lied to me about what I was signing." They exchanged another look, and I could see them shifting tactics. "Look," Dad said, trying to sound reasonable. "We know this looks bad. But we had some unexpected expenses over the years. Your medical bills when you broke your arm. Car repairs. The roof leak. We were going to pay it all back before you turned 18, but then the pandemic hit and I lost some sales. This started when I was 14. Way before the pandemic. The point is," Mom interrupted, "we always intended to take care of this. And we will. We just need a little more time." "How much more time? And how much money are we talking about?" Another look between them. "About $30,000, Dad said quietly. The room started spinning. $30,000. They'd put $30,000 of debt in my name. "But don't worry," Mom added quickly. "We're going to pay it back. Every penny. You just need to be patient with us." "When?" I demanded. "When are you going to pay it back? Next month? Next year? When I'm 30? "We don't know exactly when," Dad said. "But we're working on it. I've got some potential deals coming through at work, and your mom is looking at getting a second job. You've been working on your finances my entire life. You've never successfully saved money or paid off debt. What makes you think you can handle $30,000? "Because we have to," Mom said. "Because we love you and we're going to make this right." But I could see it in their eyes. They had no plan. They had no intention of paying this back. They'd probably convinced themselves that by the time I found out, I'd be an adult with my own income and I could just take over the payments. "I want you to pay this off immediately," I said. Dad actually laughed. "With what money?" "I don't care. Figure it out. Sell the house. Sell your cars. Get loans. I don't care what you have to do, but I want my name cleared." "Absolutely not," Mom said. "This is our home. We've lived here for 15 years. We're not selling our house because you can't be grateful for everything we've done for you." "Grateful?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You want me to be grateful that you committed identity theft?" "We want you to be grateful that we raised you," Dad said. "We want you to be grateful that we didn't abandon you when things got tough. We want you to be grateful that we've always put a roof over your head, even when it meant making some difficult financial decisions." "Difficult financial decisions? You mean stealing from your own child?" "We mean doing whatever it took to keep this family together," Mom said. And if you can't understand that, if you can't appreciate the sacrifices we've made, then maybe you need to do some growing up. The conversation went in circles for another hour. They alternated between promising to pay it back someday, justifying it as necessary for the family, and guilting me for being ungrateful. Finally, I gave up and went back to my room. But I wasn't done. I was just getting started. That night, I didn't sleep. I spent the entire night researching everything I could about identity theft, credit repair, and legal options. What I learned was both encouraging and terrifying. On the encouraging side, what my parents had done was a serious crime. Identity theft, fraud, possibly even racketeering, since they'd done it multiple times over several years. I had legal options. On the terrifying side, even if I pressed charges and won, repairing my credit was going to be a long, complicated process. And there was no guarantee that my parents would ever actually pay back the money. But the more I read, the more determined I became. I found story after story of people who'd been in similar situations. Some had just accepted it and spent years paying off their parents' debt. Others had fought back. I knew which category I wanted to be in. I also learned about something called a credit freeze, which would prevent anyone, including my parents, from opening new accounts in my name. That was going to be my first step. But before I did anything, I needed to document everything. I printed out all of my credit reports from all 3 bureaus. I gathered up every piece of paperwork I could find with my name on it. I started building a case. The next morning at breakfast, my parents acted like nothing had happened. Mom made pancakes, Dad read the newspaper, and they both chatted about weekend plans like we hadn't just had a massive fight about them destroying my financial future. "We've been thinking," Dad said without looking up from his paper. "Maybe it's time for you to start contributing to the household expenses." I almost choked on my orange juice. "Excuse me?" "Well, you're about to turn 18, Mom said brightly. "And you've got a job. It's time you learned about financial responsibility." The audacity was breathtaking. They'd stolen $30,000 from me, and now they wanted me to pay them rent. "How much financial responsibility?" I asked carefully. "We're thinking $500 a month," Dad said. "That's very reasonable for room and board." "And that would be in addition to the $30,000 you owe me?" Mom's smile faltered slightly. "That's a separate issue." "No, it's not. It's all connected. You've stolen from me, destroyed my credit, and now you want me to pay you rent on top of it." "We didn't steal anything," Dad said, finally looking up from his paper. "And if you're going to keep being disrespectful about this, maybe you should find somewhere else to live." There it was. The threat I'd been expecting. "Fine," I said. Both of them stared at me. I don't think they'd expected me to agree so readily. "Fine?" Mom repeated. "Fine. I'll find somewhere else to live. But first, I'm going to report the identity theft to the police and the credit bureaus. I'm going to dispute every fraudulent account you opened in my name. And I'm going to press charges." The silence in the kitchen was deafening. "You wouldn't," Dad said finally. "Watch me. I'll skip over the next few days, which were filled with threats, crying, guilt trips, and more gaslighting than I knew was humanly possible. The highlights. Mom cried and said I was destroying the family. Dad threatened to kick me out immediately. They both claimed I was being manipulated by internet strangers. I'd made the mistake of mentioning Reddit. They offered to work out a payment plan for the debt, with no specifics and no timeline. They suggested family therapy, with them choosing the therapist, naturally, but I'd made up my mind. I was done. Fortunately, I had some options. I'd been working part-time for 2 years and had saved about $8,000. One of my coworkers had mentioned that her older brother was looking for a roommate. And my boss at the grocery store had already said he could give me more hours if I needed them. It took me 3 days to arrange everything. I'd be splitting a 2-bedroom apartment with Jake, my coworker's brother, who was 20 and going to community college. Rent would be $400 a month including utilities. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine. The hardest part was keeping it secret from my parents while I got everything arranged. They were watching me like hawks, clearly expecting me to back down and apologize at any moment. On Saturday morning, while they were both out running errands, Jake came over with his truck. We loaded up all of my belongings, which wasn't much, and I left a note on the kitchen table. _Mom and Dad, _. I've moved out. I meant what I said about reporting the identity theft and pressing charges. You have 48 hours to contact me with a concrete plan for paying back the money and clearing my credit. If I don't hear from you, or if your plan isn't acceptable, I'm going to the police. I didn't want it to come to this, but you left me no choice. Your son who deserves better than parents who steal from him. Then I turned off my phone and drove to my new apartment. Those first 48 hours were weird. I kept expecting them to call, to text, to show up at my door begging me to come home. But my phone stayed silent. Jake was a great roommate. He gave me space to process everything but was also there to talk when I needed it. He'd been through his own family drama, different issues, but he understood the feeling of being betrayed by the people who were supposed to protect you. The hardest part, he told me on Sunday night, is accepting that they're not going to suddenly become the parents you deserve. You keep waiting for them to do the right thing, but they've already shown you who they are. That hit hard because he was right. I was still holding on to some hope that they'd come to their senses, apologize, and figure out how to make things right. But deep down, I knew they weren't going to. They'd had every opportunity to handle this like adults, and instead they'd chosen to gaslight me, threaten me, and demand rent money on top of the debt they'd already put in my name. On Monday morning, exactly 48 hours after I'd left the note, I checked my phone one more time. Nothing. Time to go to the police. The police station was intimidating, but the officer who took my report, Officer Martinez, was incredibly professional and understanding. Apparently, identity theft by family members is more common than you'd think. The good news is that you have excellent documentation, she said after reviewing my credit reports and the timeline I'd put together. The bad news is that cases like this can take a while to resolve, especially when family is involved. She explained the process. They'd open an investigation, contact my parents for their side of the story, and then determine whether to file charges. In the meantime, I should dispute the fraudulent accounts with the credit bureaus and file a complaint with the FTC. One more thing, Officer Martinez said as she walked me out. You mentioned that your parents have access to your social security card and other personal information. You should consider putting a freeze on your credit immediately. That was my next stop. Freezing my credit with all 3 bureaus was surprisingly easy. One phone call to each bureau, some identity verification, and it was done. No one would be able to open new accounts in my name without my explicit permission. It felt incredibly empowering. For the first time since this whole nightmare started, I was in control. But I wasn't done. I also filed disputes for every fraudulent account on my credit report. The credit card companies were surprisingly helpful once I explained that I was a minor when the accounts were opened and that I'd filed a police report for identity theft. We'll investigate each account, the representative from Capital One told me. If we determine that the accounts were opened fraudulently, we'll close them and remove them from your credit report. The process usually takes 30 to 60 days. Similar conversations with Chase, Discover, and American Express. Everyone was professional, sympathetic, and helpful. I started to feel like maybe, just maybe, this was going to work out. It was Tuesday evening, 3 days after I'd moved out, when my phone finally rang. Mom. I almost didn't answer, but I figured I should at least hear what they had to say. Honey, Mom's voice was shaky, like she'd been crying. We need to talk. I'm listening. Can you come home? Please. We can work this out as a family. I am home. And I gave you 48 hours to contact me with a plan. That deadline passed yesterday. We know. We were just. We needed time to figure things out. Did you? Figure things out? A long pause. We talked to a credit counselor, she said finally. And? And they said it's going to take some time to pay everything off. But we can do it. We can set up payment plans with all the companies and have everything paid off in. Well, it might take a few years, but we can do it. How many years? Another pause. Maybe 5 or 6. But we can make extra payments when possible, and if Dad gets that promotion he's been working toward. I closed my eyes. Even now, even after everything, they were still living in fantasy land. Mom, I've already filed a police report. I've already disputed all the accounts. This isn't something we can handle as a family anymore. You called the police? Her voice went up an octave. On your own parents? You committed crimes against me. What did you expect? We expected you to act like family. We expected you to understand that sometimes families have to help each other. Families don't steal from each other. We didn't steal. We borrowed. There's a difference. Without my knowledge or consent. That's stealing. You're being ridiculous, Dad's voice came on the line. He must have grabbed the phone from Mom. And you're making a huge mistake. Do you have any idea what happens to families when the police get involved? Do you have any idea how this is going to affect all of us? You should have thought about that before you decided to commit identity theft. Fine, his voice was cold now. If you want to destroy this family, that's your choice. But don't come crawling back to us when you realize what you've done. And he hung up. I sat in my new apartment, staring at my phone, and realized I felt relieved. They'd had every opportunity to do the right thing, and instead they'd chosen to be victims. They'd made this easy for me. Over the next few weeks, the police investigation moved forward. Detective Williams, who'd taken over from Officer Martinez, called to update me on their progress. "We've interviewed your parents," he said. "They're claiming that you gave them permission to use your identity for the credit applications." "I was a minor." "Exactly. That's what makes this interesting from a legal perspective. Even if you had given permission, which we have no evidence of, you couldn't legally consent to entering into credit agreements as a minor." He explained that they'd found evidence of several more accounts than what I'd originally discovered. Apparently, my parents had been busy. "We're looking at potential charges of identity theft, credit card fraud, and possibly conspiracy since your mother and father were working together," Detective Williams said. "The prosecutor's office is reviewing everything now." Meanwhile, my disputes with the credit card companies were paying off. One by one, the fraudulent accounts were being closed and removed from my credit report. My score was slowly climbing back up. But the most satisfying development came from an unexpected source. Jake's older sister Emma was a paralegal at a law firm that specialized in consumer protection and identity theft cases. When Jake mentioned my situation to her, she offered to have one of the attorneys take a look at my case. "This is pretty straightforward," Attorney Sarah Chen told me during our consultation. "Your parents committed multiple felonies. The question is whether you want to pursue criminal charges, civil damages, or both." "What's the difference?" "Criminal charges are handled by the prosecutor's office. If your parents are convicted, they could face fines and jail time, but you wouldn't necessarily recover any money. Civil damages would be a separate lawsuit where you sue them for the financial harm they caused you." She explained that in cases like mine, it was common to pursue both options. "There's also something else we can do," she said. "We can get a court order that permanently prohibits your parents from using your identity or personal information for any financial purposes. It's like a restraining order, but for identity theft." That sounded perfect. "How much would this cost?" I asked. "For a case this clear-cut, with this much documentation, I'd be willing to take it on contingency. That means you don't pay unless we win, and then we take a percentage of any damages we recover." I signed the paperwork that afternoon. 2 months after I'd filed the police report, Detective Williams called with an update. "The prosecutor's office has decided to file charges," he said. "Your parents are being charged with identity theft in the first degree, credit card fraud, and conspiracy. They'll be arrested later this week." The arrests happened on a Thursday. I didn't find out until Friday, when my mom called me from jail. "Are you happy now?" she asked through tears. "Your father and I spent the night in jail because of you. Is this what you wanted?" "I wanted you not to steal from me," I said calmly. "Everything that's happened since then has been your choice." "Were your parents?" "You're criminals who happen to share my DNA. The lawyer says we could go to prison." "Good. How can you say that? How can you want to send your own parents to prison? The same way you could steal $30,000 from your own child." She hung up. While the criminal case was working its way through the system, Sarah filed our civil lawsuit. We weren't just going after the $30,000 they'd stolen, we were going after damages for the harm to my credit, the time and expense I'd incurred fixing their mess, and punitive damages for the deliberate nature of their fraud. The lawsuit also included a request with a permanent injunction that would prevent them from ever using my identity again. "We're asking for $75,000 in total damages," Sarah explained. "That might seem like a lot, but identity theft cases often result in significant awards, especially when the perpetrators are family members who abused a position of trust." My parents hired their own lawyer, a public defender for the criminal case, and some guy they found online for the civil case. Their strategy seemed to be a combination of family disputes shouldn't go to court, and our son is an ungrateful brat who's destroying the family over money. It wasn't going to work. About 6 months into the process, the prosecutor's office reached out about a potential plea deal. My parents were willing to plead guilty to lesser charges in exchange for probation instead of jail time. I was asked if I'd be willing to support the plea agreement. "No," I said immediately. "Can I ask why?" the prosecutor, Ms. Rodriguez, asked. "A plea deal would guarantee a conviction and save you from having to testify at trial." "Because they haven't shown any remorse. They haven't acknowledged that what they did was wrong. They haven't made any effort to pay back the money or fix the damage they caused. All they've done is try to make me feel guilty for holding them accountable." Ms. Rodriguez nodded. "What if the plea deal included full restitution?" "How are they going to pay restitution? They couldn't pay the original debt, that's why we're here in the first place." "They could set up a payment plan." "No. I'm not interested in spending the next 10 years chasing them for money they don't have. I want this to go to trial. While all the legal stuff was happening, I was trying to rebuild my life. College had to be postponed, there was no way I could afford tuition while dealing with all of this, but I was working full-time now and slowly building up my savings again. My credit score had climbed from 487 to 650 as the fraudulent accounts were removed from my report. It wasn't perfect yet, but it was functional. Jake and I had become close friends, almost like brothers. His family had basically adopted me for holidays and family gatherings. It was weird at first, being around a functional family that actually supported each other, but it was also healing. You know what the craziest part is? I told Jake one evening. I keep waiting to feel guilty about this. Like, they're my parents. Shouldn't I feel bad about pressing charges against them? Do you feel bad? No. I feel free. Like I finally don't have to pretend that their behavior is normal or acceptable. That's because it's not normal or acceptable. Normal parents don't steal from their children. He was right, but it had taken me a long time to truly accept that. As we got closer to the trial date, Sarah and I spent a lot of time preparing. The criminal trial would go first, followed by the civil trial. The good news is that we have an overwhelming amount of evidence, Sarah said. Credit reports, bank records, signed applications with your forged signature, testimony from the credit card companies. This isn't a he said, she said situation. What's the bad news? Juries can be unpredictable, especially in family cases. There's always a chance that some jurors will think this is a family matter that shouldn't have gone to court. But Sarah wasn't too worried about that possibility. Your parent's lawyer is going to try to paint you as an ungrateful child who's destroying his family over money. But the evidence is so clear that it's going to be hard for anyone to see you as anything other than a victim. As part of the trial preparation, Sarah suggested that I write a victim impact statement, a letter that I could read in court explaining how my parents' actions had affected me. This is your chance to tell your story in your own words, she said. To help the judge and jury understand the real impact of what your parents did. I spent weeks working on that letter. It was one of the hardest things I'd ever written. The criminal trial lasted 3 days. The prosecutor presented a methodical case, walking the jury through each fraudulent account, each forged signature, each missed payment that had damaged my credit. My parents' defense attorney tried to argue that this was a family matter that had gotten out of hand, that my parents had always intended to pay back the money, and that I was being vindictive by pressing charges. But when the credit card representatives testified about the forged applications, when the bank representatives testified about the cash advances taken out in my name, when Detective Williams testified about the total scope of the fraud, it was pretty clear that this wasn't a family misunderstanding. The most damaging testimony came from my parents themselves. On the stand, my father tried to justify what they'd done. We were struggling financially, he said. We needed help. And he's our son, what's ours is his and what's his is ours. That's how families work. But did you tell your son that you were opening these accounts in his name? The prosecutor asked. We didn't think we needed to. We're his parents. Did you tell him when you were missing payments on these accounts? No. Did you tell him when his credit score was being damaged? No. Did you make any effort to pay off these accounts before he discovered them? A long pause. We were working on it. That's not what I asked. Did you make any payments on these accounts in the 3 years before your son discovered them? We made some payments. How many? I don't remember exactly. The prosecutor pulled out a stack of bank records. According to the credit card statements, you made a total of 4 payments across all 4 accounts over 3 years. 4 payments totaling $340 on $30,000 worth of debt. Is that your idea of working on it? My father didn't have a good answer for that. My mother's testimony was even worse. She broke down crying on the stand and tried to claim that they'd only done what they did because they loved me so much. We were trying to keep the family together, she sobbed. We didn't want to lose our house. We didn't want our son to grow up in poverty. Everything we did for him. But you didn't do it with his knowledge or consent, did you? The prosecutor asked. He was just a child. Children don't understand these kinds of decisions. He was 17 when he discovered what you'd done. Why didn't you explain the situation to him then and ask for his help in resolving it? We tried to, but he wouldn't listen. He was so angry. Were you planning to pay off this debt before he discovered it? We were going to try. That's not what I asked. Did you have a plan to pay off this debt? We were hoping things would get better financially. So the answer is no. You had no plan to pay off the debt you'd incurred in your minor son's name. More crying, but no real answer. When it was my turn to testify, I was nervous but ready. I'd been preparing for this moment for months.